we have to go on the offense because what the Trump administration is doing is not just abhorrent, it is deeply unpopular and wrong and seen as wrong by a large number of people that voted for Donald Trump.
All right, we are back. He's a Democratic congressman from Texas. He represents parts of Austin and San Antonio. He's the new chairman of the House Progressive Caucus. It's Congressman Greg Casar. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Great to meet you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Good to meet you, too. You had to be suited. You took your jacket off. You know, we're in podcast. You hear the manosphere is where it's all at these days. Okay?
Yeah, I saw the chill pinto beans background and the necklace. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
You got to wear one of those big Mark Zuckerberg necklaces now that you're kind of hitting middle age, and you know that's what's happening. That's what's happening out there.
Maybe that's how we get the votes back, man.
We'll talk about that at the end. I want to talk about the new administration first.
Okay.
And there's just so much shit happening, obviously, and so I kind of just want to do open-ended. Like, what is the thing that is alarming you the most as you're watching this day in, day out?
It's really hard to pick just one thing. It feels like the news from yesterday, I want to come on to your podcast and rail about it. And then there's worse news today. And that's just how it's been for over 100 days. But what I've been telling folks, there was a group of fired federal workers sitting on the House steps yesterday as I came out of voting next to a group of high schoolers, and people cuddled up and asked me kind of a similar question. And I think what was alarming and at root of so much of this, and what I think they're making worse, is like this baseline cynicism that nothing we ever do together can ever work. And what I've really learned, I'm relatively new to Congress. You know, I've only been here 2.5 years. What I've really seen is how deliberate the extreme right-wing strategy is to break stuff and then complain about it, and then campaign about how it's broken, and then break it more. That kind of works alongside the law of entropy, that it's easier to break stuff than to make it. You know, like a 2-year-old can go and shatter that microphone in front of you, but it's pretty complicated. It takes a lot of people to put it together. And if people stop believing that we can make things better, then you just turn against each other. You kind of undo the entire democratic project of working alongside one another. And so what's alarming to me is how hard it might be, even if we figure out, and we need to figure out how to take this thing back, take our government back into the hands of people that want to make things, just how much stuff is broken and how much of an opening they've created for people to keep cynically breaking things, campaigning and winning power that way.
Man, you put it that way, and you're like, "Boy, this is a bigger challenge than you even think." Right? It's like it's gonna be one thing.
That's part of what I learn every day around here is that actually it can get worse.
Yeah, it's one thing to say that's like, "Oh, let's beat these guys in the midterms," and that is an achievable goal, right? And that is kind of really a negative goal, honestly. Like in some ways, you guys are the DCCC, not the Progressive Caucus per se, but the DCCC just has to prove that they've broken things and hurt people, right? But then what? You know, I do think.
Then what? And I hate here at the top of the podcast to be the doom and gloom guy. I don't.
This is the doomer pod, man. That's great.
That's the part of the doom scroll. Yeah. For me, one of the tracks that I think we might be on, you know, in the multiverse here, which world I think we might be in, is one where we can win the midterms and provide some check on Trump in a 1.5 years, which of course is critical and we've got to do. Yeah. But then if we go, okay, as long as we just point out that they break stuff and then we win the midterm election, which in the midterms is much more voters that read the news. Yeah. And we just go and win it back that way, that we kind of pat ourselves on the back, clean our hands and say, hey, we're good for the next presidential. And then we go get our lunch eaten by JD Vance or somebody else like that for 8 years after that. Yeah. And so if 100 days of this was rough, like 12 years of it to me is unacceptable. And we've got to be thinking much bigger than just winning in the next 1.5 years. It's like, what does it take to beat the cynicism that's at the heart of what we're dealing with right now?
All right. Well, I was going to get into Democratic stuff second, but we'll just flip it now because you set it on the table. No, let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah. You set it on the table. We'll do a little bit of what does that look like, and then we can come back to talk about how terrible Trump is again at the end. Plenty of material there. Because man, I've been watching your stuff. You had a Politico piece, a New York Times piece. Well, I kind of wanted to have you on and talk about it. And there is a move, as I mentioned, you're in the Progressive Caucus. Were you officially a squad member, or were you like squad adjacent?
I never got like the official pin or whatever it is. Secret thing. No, I mean, it's
all right. So we're going to call you kind of in the SWAT extended cinematic universe.
That's right.
And you've done some town halls in red districts, which was great. Done some events with Bernie and AOC, and there's this view out there that like the path back for Democrats to winning working class voters is to really lean in on economic populism. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, even if all those policies probably aren't my preferred priors. But what I do wonder is if that's even true. And I do wonder if these voters, the working class voters that Democrats have lost, are like cross-pressured. And the bigger, and while they might, be interested in whatever, free childcare, bigger minimum wage, all those economic populist issues, that what is holding them back is cultural issues, right? Feeling like Democrats are out of touch for their concerns about whatever it is, crime, immigration. So you pick whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how you think about that. I
would, it's a relief, to be honest, to be able to be on a podcast like this where we can really flesh those hard questions out. Because a lot of times, you get like a minute on these TV shows and you got to just go right in. But I think you're asking a real question that should keep folks up at night. And I think first I want to give you a brief anecdote about campaigning for Kamala Harris in Nevada, in Sparks, Nevada, talking to Latino construction workers, and then sort of pivot that into a question about your question.
Cool.
So, I went to, I campaigned all over Texas, but then specifically went to Nevada for Harris's campaign, and pretty much knew we were toast. I didn't know, but really felt we were toast, talking with groups of Latino voters, both in Vegas and north of Vegas and across the state, and got together with, there was one time where we got together with about 3-4 dozen Latino, mostly workers in the trades, be it folks doing HVAC maintenance or in the building and construction trades. And I remember a really clear conversation with one guy. It was a bunch of folks who said they voted for Obama, voted for Hillary, voted for Joe, but just weren't going to be able to vote for Kamala this time. And he said, well, I just feel like you're so much more focused. When I asked the guy, like, well, what changed your mind this time? You voted for Biden Harris just recently. You voted for Hillary. And he said to me, I just feel like even though Trump is terrible in so many ways, I feel like the Democratic Party is focused on not my stuff. I go and work 7 days a week. I pull 7/12s, and then suddenly building and construction goes down for a couple months. And that's just my life. I'm trying to figure out how to put my kid through school. And I feel like y'all aren't focused on other stuff other than my daily life. Right. And I push him, like I push lots of guys. Yeah. I push him just like I push guys. I'm like, what other stuff? And he's like, other stuff. And I was like, do you mean, for example, issues with gay communities? Like, yeah, that was my guess. It might maybe could have been something else, but that's why it was my guess. And he said, yes. And I think the question we've got to ask ourselves is, why is it that, President Joe Biden was like the building stuff president. I mean, the infrastructure law and frankly, a lot of the construction coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act were like some of his biggest achievements. How is it that Republicans were able to raise the salience so much on those cultural issues? And what does the Democratic Party need to change so that it doesn't seem like to people that our leading number one issue is one where a lot of our base voters are cross-pressured on, like you said. And what I said to him was, look, my views on LGBTQ issues are clear. I'm pro-equality. I think that we should end discrimination against all forms of discrimination against all forms of people. But my main stuff that I work on is making sure you get actually paid overtime for the extra hours you work, that there's enough construction that you aren't out of work for multiple months, and that your employer shouldn't be allowed to screw people over and sometimes not even pay them after doing weeks or months of work. And so even if we might disagree on some of those issues, if you knew that this was really our main thing and that today's Republicans are trying to get rid of overtime pay and trying to do all of these other things, that I know you talk about a lot on your podcast. He was like, yeah, I would totally vote for that. I mean, that's easy. And so to me, I think the core question is, why aren't those economic messages breaking through if indeed oftentimes it's what we're working on? And part of what economic populism does is it draws a sharp enough contrast with Republicans where we don't just seem kind of in between or Republican light, where we can really say, no, there is a real difference about what we're offering on the economy, so that something like trans collegiate sports does not, Trump can't go and make that a major issue in our politics for people. And I want to get back to you here in 1 second. The last thing I'll mention on it is I'm about to go to a hearing on trans fencing. I mean, on the DOJ committee, Marjorie Taylor Greene chairs it.
Yeah.
The hearing is on trans fencing.
Well, that's a big problem.
Let's take fencing out of it. There are 10,
sword fighting or like building fences. Sword fighting, fencing,
sword fighting.
Okay, got it. There are too many trans people sword fighting. That's a big problem.
And there are 10. According to the
in
NCAA,
Rome, Georgia, where her district is, we think we got a lot of. Do they have a single fencer? Do they have a cis fencer in Rome, Georgia?
That's a good question. But there are 10 trans collegiate athletes in the NCAA right now. There are like 30 members of our damn committee. And so it's not 10,000, 10. So of course, discrimination against LGBTQ people, real issue. But, our committee shouldn't be doing this work, determining who it can and can't across a variety of sports go and participate at the collegiate or elite level. Like, come on. But the hard question Democrats have to answer for ourselves is, how can we let that kind of an issue become something that a daily guy living his life in Nevada is asking me about when I sit down with him as a member of Congress who traveled across the country to talk to him? How is it? I understand what the Republican tactics are, but how is it the Democratic Party needs to change our tactics so that there isn't a vacuum that Republican officials can fill on issues like this? And in my view, economic populism is our best response, which is we should be saying things that are actually interesting and controversial enough and different enough that people actually really hear us. Instead of just saying defend Social Security, which polls at like 90%, but nobody hears you. Why don't we say that it's crazy that the Mark Zuckerbergs and Jeff Bezoses of the world don't really pay into Social Security? They pay in like one day, but the taxes on Social Security, the tax rate for Social Security is way higher for you or me and way higher for a school teacher and for a sanitation worker and a custodian and HVAC maintenance guy than it is on those guys. We can save it, but maybe we can expand it and make your Social Security check higher and pull every senior in this country out of poverty. Literally, if we just say those big guys have to just literally pay the same rate that we pay, that's not the message. I don't think anybody could argue that that was how people felt that the Harris campaign's core message was those guys are making you work more hours. They think you're working those hours to make them rich. And they're screwing you over, not just on the job, but they're screwing you over in the government. I think that would stand out to people a lot more than kind of where we stand right now.
I hear the embers of a bipartisan of you working with the moderate types, because I'm like, can we also means test so Mark Zuckerberg isn't taking Social Security? He's not only not paying in enough, but he's taking it, which I don't get. Anyway, I think let's try to hash out there, because sometimes I do feel like people who have a more moderate temperament like me and progressives, like we talk past each other where there are a lot of areas of agreement. Here's one area of agreement that we have. The Democrats need to be much better about making economic issues the main thing. And I think doing, more aggressive communications that create contrast with the oligarchs. Like, I'm for all that. Like, that all makes sense to me. I go back to the Carville thing. Voters only know 3 things about a candidate. One of those 3 things should be you're going to be fighting for them and not the rich people if you're a Democrat, right? And I don't think that was true for Kamala, or really probably, or Biden or Hillary for that matter. Here's my issue though. Just to put a finer point on it, let's say we agree on that. We got a Senate race coming up next year in Texas. You're in a red state. if a Democrat is going to win that Senate race and beat John Cornyn or God love him, maybe Ken Paxton, if we agree that Democrat should make some kind of fighting the oligarchy like the number one issue that they have, the key issue, let's just put that on the table. We agree. And that's the one thing we want voters to know about that Democrat. Can they win, though, if they're still seen as a just down the line Democrat on all the social issues? Like, don't they also have to demonstrate some distance from the national party on cultural issues if they're going to succeed in Texas?
Look, I'm chairman of the Progressive Caucus.
I know.
Right?
That's why it's a hard question.
Yeah, no. I'm chairman of the Progressive Caucus, and it is very important for there to be some part of our party that adheres to our longstanding tradition of being willing to stand for vulnerable people and causes that may not be popular yet. It was progressives in the Progressive Caucus that were out there on gay marriage before it was a popular issue. It's Progressive Caucus members that are going to make sure that, be first out there to say if somebody's escaping from war and getting killed, that we've got to figure out that our country actually helps support people in that situation and doesn't repeat our mistakes from World War II, where we turned away entire ships of Jewish refugees just to go back to the Holocaust camps. Somebody's got to do that. And I think that that's a key part of progressives' role. And progressives need to recognize what issues we are completely on the front foot about, because actually our ideas are more popular than the Democratic Party brand, and on which issues we're still doing persuasion. And so I'm here to admit on your podcast, on your show, that I understand that the mainline Democratic Party view, and to flip a red state, people that are campaigning to flip a red state are likely going to have views on some of these social issues that are not as progressive as mine. Like, okay, that's fine. You know what I mean? Like, but it's important, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that progressive
attacked. I mean, look, I think that there have been a lot of Democrats who've been kind of afraid to run in red states I'm in Louisiana, right? People are like, I just saw a tweet yesterday about John Bell Edwards. They're floating him running for Senate. I think that's a really big long shot, more of a long shot than Texas, but let's just say he's pro-life. And then I saw a tweet of people replying to him as like, the Democrats can't have a pro-life candidate. And it's like, well, why even run in Louisiana then? Like, why even try to compete? I don't know. Like, can they have the room to do that?
Yeah, look, I don't think anybody should run their campaign based on their Twitter replies.
Well, no, of course not. Of course
not. But here's what I think. I think we need to make sure, like, I don't think that it is just so cut and dry. Like, here's where a poll is, here's what you should just say, etc. I do understand. I mean, and Kamala Harris, for example, ran a campaign with immigration views that were significantly more to the center than, for example, my preferred immigration platform.
Yeah.
Fine. The question is, how do you calibrate your policy in a way that still speaks to your values and still speaks to your base and is still where most voters are? And I know that would be, of course, a really hard question for somebody to answer that's trying to flip Louisiana or flip Texas. Yeah. But here's where I think I have something to really add, which is the beginning point of your question. Look, even as somebody sorts that out, and as they should sort that out, if on those economic issues we don't contrast enough, make them simple enough, and make them bold and big enough, then the immigration conversation or whatever other social issue conversation can then just dominate the field. And we can't allow it to dominate the field, because at the end of the day, even somebody more conservative on those social issues is not going to be murderous on those issues, right? No matter how tough you are on it, Democrats aren't going to be for freaking sending people to foreign prison camps in El Salvador without due process. None of us are going to be for bullying a trans kid and denying them healthcare and telling their parents they got to get on a plane to save their kid's life. So at the end of the day, part of our work needs to be to say, sure, of course, we need a big tent. Of course, we can't have purity tests for who can and can't be in our party in a way where we're really exclusive and exclusionary. And I think the progressive movement needs to learn from and think about how we need to add more people to our tent. So I think that maybe goes to answering that part of your question. Yeah. But what we can't forget, and this is where maybe people once think of it as progressive, but fine, if people want to call this moderate or old school or whatever, I don't think we can have our economic ideas continue to be so incremental, so hard to understand, that it just isn't going to make much of a difference to people. Like, you might get this specific kind of help if you got 2 kids and you make more or less than this. And I just think we've got to get to a place where we say, no, we're going to pull every senior and kid in this country out of poverty. No, we're going to raise wages for millions of people. Yeah, we're going to crack down on corporate price gouging in a huge way. We're going to tax the billionaires and stock trading by members of Congress and fight for you. That's economically populist. Do you want to call it progressive, or do you want to call it what a lot more moderate members are out there fighting for? Yeah. I care less about what it's called. I think that we just have not drawn that level of contrast. And I think that then only leaves us with trying to lightly calibrate on some of these social issues. And that ain't working on its own.
All right, last thing. I know you have this important fencing hearing to get to, but we do have one big agreement on what you just said in there, and that is on disappearing people and sending them to El Salvador. That's happening from Texas, from your state. We're just reading the big story about Neri Alvarado. He's the guy with the autism awareness tattoo. He's Dallas, other part of the state from you, but still, are there more things Democrats can be doing about this? Should people be doing more about this? How can people pressure the administration? Because I don't know, man, if Joe Rogan, who's there and who might be in your district actually in Austin, if Joe Rogan can be against this, I feel like Democrats can actually be on the front foot on this. So just talk about that real quick.
It's really important for us to not just think that on immigration issues we're on the back foot and on the defense forever. We have to go on the offense, because what the Trump administration is doing is not just abhorrent, it is deeply unpopular and wrong, and seen as wrong by a large number of people that voted for Donald Trump. And we have to go and talk to those folks, and people understand that eroding due process for everyday people in this country is dangerous for everyone in this country. And we can remember that it was just 7 years ago where the people, Democrats, but actually people all across the country, were actually on offense on immigration vis-a-vis Donald Trump. People said these kids being put in cages is wrong. Moms being separated from their kids is wrong. So we can't just go be on defense on this issue. We have to go out there and say, look, most of the people that they're arresting in some of these raids have no criminal history whatsoever. Law enforcement resources are being taken away from going after drug trafficking and gun trafficking, and it's being turned towards arresting somebody with an autism awareness tattoo. And then they're taking our taxpayer money to pay a foreign dictator to put somebody in a prison camp. And then the Supreme Court is saying, bring them back. And Trump is saying no. I mean, that's we can't be scared to go on offense on those sorts of issues. And I think that as progressives, I'm willing to, again, say here on your podcast that we've got to think about communicating those issues in a way that doesn't just energize our existing people, but adds and brings people in. Because I'll admit 7 or 8 years ago, I think a lot of folks treated Trump as a one-time aberration, instead of this is actually a long-standing real challenge, which means we've got to bring more people into our tent to be able to win democratically against somebody that would like to see our country not run that way.
Amen, brother. All right, to be continued. Much more. Thanks for coming on the pod. I know you've got there's really important work. Really important work. Who knows how we might need to do a nut check on fencers, and so we can't get to the rest of the pod.
It is really sad that but I do think that it begs the real question, man. As I head over there, it begs the real question of, how sick is it that you go and pick on folks that are already discriminated against, already having trouble. It's the oldest trick in the tyranny book, and we've got to find a better way to fight it. So I appreciate it.
Amen, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.